Welcome, deep divers. Have you ever found yourself wrestling with a decision, that nagging internal conflict where one path promises comfort, ease, or immediate satisfaction, while the other, often far more challenging, whispers with quiet insistence of what's truly right? It's that profound moment when doing what feels good clashes with doing what feels, well, moral.
Absolutely.
What is it in that instant that compels some of us, perhaps even against our strongest desires, to choose the arduous path of duty? Is it merely a fleeting feeling, a conditioned response from upbringing? Or is there something profoundly deeper at play, an intrinsic universal command of reason itself?
That inner tug of war, yeah, it's a question that has preoccupied humanity for centuries. And for many remains a mystery, right? Often attributed to societal norms, personal upbringing, or even just gut instinct.
Right, just go with your gut.
Exactly. But what if beneath all those surface-level explanations, there's an underlying universal structure to this moral compulsion, a fundamental logic that we can not only identify but understand?
That's precisely where we're headed today, because that profound human dilemma sits right at the heart of one of the most revolutionary philosophical works ever penned, Immanuel Kant's critique of practical reason.
A big one.
Oh, yeah. And this isn't just some dusty abstract tome from the 18th century. It's a rigorous, breathtaking exploration into the very essence of moral action, human freedom, and, dare I say, the ultimate purpose of our rational existence. It's a work that challenges us to rethink everything we thought we knew about doing the right thing.
Indeed. It's a text that fundamentally redefines how we understand the good will and what morality truly demands of us. It shifts the focus from external consequences or even our natural feelings.
Which is where most people think morality comes from, right?
Yeah.
Feelings are outcomes.
Precisely. But Kant shifts it to the internal, self-legislating power of reason. He shows us that genuine morality isn't about what you desire, but how you choose to live your life as a rational being.
Our mission today, then, is to undertake a deep dive into this intellectual masterpiece. We're going to unpack Kant's core ideas, translating his famously dense and rigorous philosophy into clear, digestible insights.
I'm trying to, anyway.
Yeah, it's a challenge. We're looking for those nuggets of knowledge, those aha moments that define how a truly good will operates, what morality demands of us, and why these ideas are as startlingly relevant today in our complex world as they were back when Kant first published this critique in 1788.
Definitely.
We're aiming for a shortcut, maybe, to understanding how reason can be profoundly practical, providing a compass for duty and freedom that cuts through the noise of fleeting desires. So let's unpack this and explore the very architecture of our moral universe.
Let's do it.
Okay, so to truly appreciate the groundbreaking nature of the critique of practical reason, we first need to set the stage, maybe, by briefly recalling Kant's first major work, the Critique of Pure Reason.
Right, the first critique, essential background.
That earlier critique explored the boundaries of what we can know about the world, and what a boundary it was.
It was a monumental achievement that really reshaped philosophy. In the Critique of Pure Reason, Kant meticulously showed that our speculative reason, that's the reason we use to try and figure things out about the world, when it ventures beyond the realm of possible experience.
Meaning beyond what we can sense or observe.
Exactly. When it tries to prove things like the existence of God, the freedom of the will, or the immortality of the soul through pure thought alone, it inevitably falls into what he called illusory and illegitimate metaphysical claims.
Illusions. Ouch.
Yeah. Our senses provide the raw data, right? And our understanding organizes that data into concepts. This partnership allows us to know the phenomenal world, the world of appearances, the world as we experience it.
So we can know that the sun rises, or that gravity works, because we can observe and conceptualize these phenomena.
Correct. But we can't observe God or freedom in the same way. There's no sensory input for those. So when reason tries to apply its concepts to noumena, to things in themselves, concepts that exist beyond any sensory input, it overreaches. It creates contradictions, what Kant called antinomies.
Antinomies, like paradoxes.
Kinda, yeah. Like trying to argue both that the world has a beginning in time and space and that it doesn't. Reason gets tied in knots. So speculative reason could only establish these grand concepts, God, freedom, immortality, as thinkable possibilities, not knowable realities. It showed the limits of our cognitive capacity for empirical proof on these big questions.
Okay, so if theoretical reason has these strict limits, leaving us unable to know about God, freedom, or immortality, where does that leave morality? It sounds like we're stranded, maybe in a state of agnosticism about the very things that seem to matter most to human life and meaning. Is that where Kant just left us hanging?
Ah, not at all. This, in fact, is precisely the opening for practical reason.
Okay.
Kant observed something interesting. He said the need for critique is less pressing in the case of practical reason compared to speculative reason. Now, why would that be?
Good question.
It's because, he argued, ordinary moral consciousness, just, regular people thinking about right and wrong, often achieves a high degree of correctness and precision in moral thought.
You mean like knowing it's wrong to lie, even if it benefits you, or feeling a clear obligation to help someone in need without having taken a philosophy course?
Precisely that. That common moral sense, that inherent grasp of ought and duty, implies that reason has a distinct and powerful role to play, not just in knowing the world as it is, but in guiding our actions within it, in determining what ought to be done. It suggests an intuitive moral faculty.
Okay, that makes sense. We do seem to have this built-in moral compass, even if we don't always follow it.
Right, and this leads us to what Kant calls the primacy of pure practical reason.
Primacy, that sounds important, like a real cornerstone of his entire system.
It absolutely is. The critique of practical reason aims to lay the foundation. Practical reason holds this primacy. What does primacy mean here?
Yeah, what does it mean?
It means that when there's a conflict or a question that theoretical reason cannot resolve, like the existence of God or freedom, practical reason, especially for our moral interests and duties, gets the final say.
So practical reason can step in where theoretical reason fails.
In a sense, yes. It can establish what we must assume to be true for the sake of our moral lives, even if theoretical reason can't prove it. This isn't about theoretical proof, remember, it's about practical necessity. It's about what our moral duties demand we believe to make sense of our ethical lives.
Okay, so let's clearly distinguish between these two fundamental uses of reason then. Theoretical reason, you said, is about what is the case, what we can know. How does that fundamentally differ from practical reason, which is concerned with what ought to be done?
Okay, so in its theoretical use, reason is concerned with objects of the cognitive faculty. Its job is to understand the world as it is, establish facts, build knowledge. Think of a scientist observing, gathering data, forming hypotheses, establishing laws of nature.
Mapping the universe.
Exactly. It seeks synthetic knowledge by bringing intuitions, raw data from senses under concepts, the organizing structures of understanding. It fundamentally asks, what can I know?
So theoretical reason is like our internal scientist trying to figure out how everything works. But practical reason, that sounds like a different kind of internal guide, more like a legislator.
Yes, exactly. A legislator is a good way to put it. Practical reason is concerned with the determining grounds of the will. Its focus is squarely on what ought to be done, on prescribing action.
Not describing, but prescribing.
Right. It aims to establish fundamental principles that guide our deliberation and choice. And crucially, it does so independently of our desires or any empirical conditions. It's about how reason itself can determine actions, how it can be a source of unconditional commands, not just observations. It asks, what should I do?
Wow, okay. That distinction is critical, isn't it? It immediately pulls morality away from just feelings or results, grounding it in pure rationality.
Absolutely. It's the foundation for everything that follows in the second critique.
So practical reason determines our will, tells us what ought to be done, even if it clashes with what we want to do. But how does this actually work? What are these practical principles that reason produces, these internal rules?
Excellent question. Kant is incredibly meticulous here. He carefully distinguishes different kinds of practical principles, moving from the subjective to the objective. At the broadest level, we have practical rules. These just prescribe actions as means to an end.
Like, if you want to build a sturdy house, lay a strong foundation. Conditional stuff.
Precisely. Like a recipe or an instruction manual. They're conditional. Now, within these, we have maxims.
Maxims, okay.
These are subjective, practical principles. They are rules an individual adopts for their own will. They're basically your personal policies, the guiding principles you live by.
So someone might adopt the maxim, I will always aim to increase my wealth by every safe means. Or I make it my maxim to always tell the truth. They're personal rules.
Exactly. They're rules for their life. But morality needs to be universal, right? So how do we get from these personal maxims to something binding on everyone?
Yeah, that's the big question. What about practical laws?
Practical laws are the key. Unlike maxims, they are objective, practical principles, valid for the will of every rational being universally and necessarily. These are what Kant calls categorical imperatives.
Categorical imperatives, that's the famous one.
That's the one. They express objective necessitation, meaning you must do them unconditionally. Regardless of your personal desires, your goals, any outcomes, their necessity is absolute for anyone with reason.
And this is where it differs crucially from a hypothetical imperative, which sounds similar but isn't quite the same, is it?
Yes, exactly. A vital distinction. Hypothetical imperatives are those practical rules that apply only if you desire a particular outcome. They always take the form, if you want X, then you should do Y.
Like Kant's example. You should work and save in your youth so as not to want in your old age.
Perfect example. That rule, that imperative, is only binding if you actually desire comfort and security in old age. If you don't care about that, if you're like, live fast, die young, then the imperative just doesn't apply to you.
So the necessity of a hypothetical imperative is entirely conditional. It depends on an external desire. My desire for comfort determines whether I adopt the maxim of saving.
Absolutely. The desire for comfort is independently given. It's not produced by the principle of saving itself. So hypothetical imperatives can't be practical laws because their necessity is conditional and subjective, not universal and objective for all rational beings. They're about prudence, skillfully getting what you want, not about morality itself, which Kant argues must be unconditional.
Okay, that feels like the first big aha moment. True morality can't be based on, if I want this, then I should do that, which leads us directly to what Kant calls the perils of material principles, or heteronomy.
Indeed. This is one of Kant's most forceful arguments. He states in Theorem that any practical principle based on an object of desire, what he calls the matter of the will, meaning anything that promises pleasure or gratification, is empirical and cannot be a practical law.
Why not? Because pleasure is subjective.
Precisely. Pleasure is based on the subjective receptivity of a feeling.
Subjective receptivity. Can you break that down a bit?
Sure. Think of it this way. What gives you pleasure, or how much pleasure you get from something, is totally personal and based on experience. Your favorite food might disgust me. The joy you get from a quiet walk might bore someone else senseless.
Right, totally individual.
Yeah, this feel-good meter is unique and can even change for the same person over time. Because these feelings are empirical, subjective, and very wildly, they cannot be known a priori before experience to be universal. And if a principle isn't universal, it can't be a moral law for all rational beings.
So, if my reason for acting is based on something that feels good to me or promises a positive outcome for me, it's immediately disqualified from being a universal moral law. But what about, higher pleasures, like appreciating art or intellectual discussion or learning a skill? Are those still problematic for Kant?
According to Kant, yes, if the feeling of gratification they promise is the determining ground of your will. This is the core of Theorem II. All such material principles, whether they involve crude sensory pleasures or these refined ones, reduce fundamentally to self-love or one's own happiness.
Wow, really? Even intellectual pleasure?
He argues that if the reason you adopt a principle is the feeling of agreeableness it promises, then these refined pleasures are ultimately of the same kind as coarse sensory pleasures in terms of their moral basis. The underlying motivation is the same. Achieve a desired feeling, a state of satisfaction for oneself.
So it's not about the nature of the pleasure, but the fact that pleasure itself is the driver. If I help someone because it makes me feel good or because I expect gratitude, that's not truly moral in Kant's view.
Exactly. It's a subtle but critical distinction. Kant isn't saying those actions are bad. He's saying they don't possess moral worth in the truest sense. It's about the why. If the determination of your will rests on the feeling of agreeableness you expect, then it's all the same. What kind of thing causes it? All that matters is how intense, how long, how easy to get, how often you can repeat that feeling.
So it doesn't matter if it's the pleasure of a fancy meal or the pleasure of solving a puzzle. If the reason I do it is because it promises pleasure or happiness, then it's all reducible to self-love. And that means it can't be a universal law.
Precisely. Such principles can't be universal laws because happiness is fundamentally subjective and empirical. What makes one person happy, where each has to put his happiness, as Kant says, is contingent. It changes. There are endless exceptions to any rule of happiness. It's impossible to universalize.
And this leads directly to the concept of heteronomy of choice.
Yes, heteronomy.
Heteronomy, great word. It means the will is determined by something external to its pure rational form, right? It's not self-legislating. It's not truly free.
Exactly. The will is determined by an object, an end, a feeling, or even the will of God, if taken as an external command without rational acceptance first. The will isn't free in the deepest sense. It's being pushed around by something outside its own rational nature.
Like justifying a lie by saying it makes you happier or avoids trouble, or even because you think God wants you to, without reasoning it through yourself.
Right. In Kant's view, your will isn't truly free then. It's heteronomous, driven by empirical outcomes or external commands rather than by its own rational self-legislation. That's the peril. We lose true moral freedom when we act on these material principles.
Okay. So if relying on desire and outcomes leads to heteronomy and isn't true morality, what is? How do we find a principle that's truly universal and unconditional? This brings us to the power of formal principles, or autonomy.
This is where Kant makes his revolutionary move. In Theorem the Third, he argues, if we strip away all matter, all objects of desire, all empirical stuff, all expected outcomes or feelings, from a practical principle, what's left?
What is left?
The mere form of giving universal law. That's it. That's what remains as a possible determining ground of the will. This is the absolute core of the categorical imperative. The will is determined solely by the form of the law, its fitness to be universalized, not by any specific content or desired result.
Wow. Okay, that's a huge mental shift. So it's not about what I do or what I get or even how it makes me feel, but the form of the rule I'm following. Whether that rule itself could be applied to everyone, everywhere, consistently.
Exactly. The categorical imperative acts as a rigorous test for our maxims. You have to ask yourself, could my maxim, my subjective principle, through my maxim at the same time give such a law? Could it consistently be willed as a universal law for all rational beings without contradiction, without destroying the very possibility of the action?
And he gives that really clear, stark example of the unrecorded monetary deposit.
This is a fantastic illustration. Imagine you hold money entrusted to you, no record, and the owner dies. Your maxim might be, deny the deposit to increase my wealth if I can get away with it. Now, universalize that.
Could it be a universal law that everyone may deny unproven deposits?
Kant says no. Such a principle, as a law, would annihilate itself since it would bring it about that there would be no deposits at all.
Because the whole idea of a deposit relies on trust. If everyone breaks that trust, the concept collapses.
Exactly. The law would contradict itself in its own application. The action becomes meaningless or impossible under universalization.
So the nugget here is that true morality isn't about consequences or personal gain, but whether your reason for acting your maxim could consistently become a universal law without self-contradiction. It tests the intention, not the outcome. And the moral law, unlike rules of self-love, commands universally.
Precisely. Duty, dictated by the moral law, is plain and universally possible. Everyone can satisfy the categorical command because it only asks for a pure maxim that can be universalized. It doesn't demand a specific outcome that might be out of your control.
Unlike trying to guarantee happiness, which is complicated and uncertain.
Right. True. Lasting advantage or happiness is veiled in impenetrable obscurity and seldom possible for everyone because it depends on luck, circumstances, abilities. Morality isn't just for the lucky or the powerful. It's accessible to all rational beings just by using reason.
This all culminates in Theorem the Fourth, where Kant states that autonomy of the will is the sole principle of all moral laws. That's a huge statement, linking freedom directly to morality.
It truly is. Autonomy, literally self-law giving. Kant defines it in two connected ways. First, negative freedom. Independence from all external determination desires, inclinations, external authorities. Freedom from heteronomy.
Okay, freedom from.
Second, and just as important, positive freedom. The will's capacity to be self-legislating, to determine itself through its own pure rational form, the form of universal law. Our will isn't just free from stuff, it's free to create its own moral law through reason.
Free to be moral.
Yes. The moral law therefore expresses nothing other than the autonomy of pure practical reason, that is freedom.
So freedom isn't just doing whatever you feel like. True freedom is doing what you ought to do, as determined by your own rational will, independent of external pressure. This suggests a really deep, inseparable connection between freedom and the moral law, like two sides of the same coin.
You've hit it exactly.
Yeah.
Kant states that freedom and unconditional practical law reciprocally imply each other. You can't have one without the other.
How does that work?
He lays it out in what he calls problem 1 and problem 2, basically. If an agent acts morally, from maxims with the form of law, they're transcendentally free. Problem 1. Conversely, if a will is truly free, its fundamental principle must be the moral law, problem 2, because it acts independently of desires, matter, and so must be guided by pure form.
Okay, a free will must act according to the moral law because there's nothing else purely rational guiding it.
Right. It has to get its directives from somewhere. And if it's free from empirical influence, the only thing left is the form of law itself.
This sounds almost circular, though. How do we even become aware of this freedom, this moral law? It's not like we get a manual at birth.
This is where the profound concept of the fact of reason, or ratio cognoscendi, comes in. It's a cornerstone.
Fact of reason, what is that?
Kant argues we become immediately conscious of the moral law as soon as we start forming maxims for our will. It's a direct awareness, underived, of the moral law's authority. Think of that innate sense of ought, that internal command you feel even when it's inconvenient or goes against desire.
That nagging feeling.
Exactly. This fact of reason, then, leads directly to the concept of freedom. We recognize we're bound by this unconditional law. And in recognizing that, we simultaneously realize we must have the freedom to act otherwise, to obey or disobey it. The ought implies can.
So the moral law is how we know we are free. And freedom is what makes the moral law apply to us in the first place.
Precisely. The moral law is the ratio cognoscendi, the ground of our knowing freedom. It's the lens through which we recognize our freedom. Conversely, freedom is the ratio ascendi, the ground of the moral laws being without freedom. The moral law wouldn't apply to us because ought would be meaningless if we couldn't choose.
That's a powerful link. That feeling of ought is the direct experience of our freedom.
Yes.
And Kant provides those famous thought experiments that really nail this down. The gallows and the prince, they feel almost visceral.
They are incredibly powerful, designed to show the practical reality of this connection. First, the man claiming his lustful inclination is irresistible. Okay, ask him. Would you still do it if there was a gallows right outside and you'd be hanged immediately?
That's for control it instantly.
Without doubt. So even strong inclinations can be overcome when a greater external consequence looms. Human will isn't simply enslaved by impulse.
Okay, that shows we can control impulse.
Yeah.
But the second one, the prince, that feels deeper.
Exactly. That's the profound test for freedom. Ask that same man, if the prince demanded on pain of immediate execution that you give false testimony against an honorable man, would you do it?
He might honestly not know if he would, facing death.
Right, he might be terrified, he might cave. But Kant says he must admit without hesitation that it would be possible for him to refuse, to choose the moral path, even facing death.
Even if he doubts his courage, he knows the possibility exists within him.
Precisely. He judges, therefore, that he can do something because he is aware that he ought to do it. The awareness of the moral ought reveals the possibility of can. That's the unmistakable proof of freedom felt directly in our moral consciousness.
That thought experiment really drives home the idea that our moral capacity, our freedom, is profound and real. But if morality isn't about feelings or desires, if we can't base it on the nice outcomes of acting morally, what motivates us to follow the moral law? It can't just be a cold, abstract principle, can it? People need some kind of push.
That's a critical point, and Kant addresses it very subtly. True moral worth requires the moral law to determine the will immediately, not through some other feeling or desire acting as a middleman.
Immediately, so reason directly moves the will.
Yes. If we rely on advantage or other feelings, even good ones like empathy or compassion, alongside the moral law as the primary incentive, Kant says it's hazardous. It produces sheer hypocrisy without substance. The spirit, the disposition, the reason why you act, matters more than the letter, just outwardly conforming. Morality can't be based on pathological feelings, meaning feelings tied to our sensible nature because they're contingent and subjective.
Okay, so we're not supposed to feel good about doing the right thing, or at least that good feelings shouldn't be the reason we do it, but we do have feelings, self-love, pride, all that. How does the moral law interact with these very human tendencies? Does it just crush them?
This is where Kant introduces this fascinating dance of self-love, self-conceit, and humiliation. He distinguishes self-love, philosophy, our natural inclination towards our own well-being.
Wanting to be happy.
Right, and self-conceit, arrogantia, which is an inflated sense of our own worth, satisfaction with ourselves before we even consider morality.
Like thinking you're great just because you're you?
Kind of, yeah. Now, pure practical reason, through the moral law, infringes upon self-love. It restricts it, disciplines it, it doesn't eliminate it, but it forces it to align with the moral law. This creates what Kant calls rational self-love.
So it channels self-love, make sure it stays within moral bounds. What about self-conceit?
That gets hit harder. The moral law strikes down self-conceit altogether. Any claims to self-esteem before your actions align with the moral law are just baseless, unwarranted arrogance.
Ouch.
Yeah. When a person compares their own sensible inclinations, their desires, pride, natural self-regard, with the strict, unconditional demands of the law unavoidably humiliates them.
Humiliation. That
Yeah.
sounds unpleasant, like a really negative motivator.
It is initially negative. It's the painful recognition of our own imperfection, our tendency to stray when measured against the absolute standard of the moral law. It's the experience of our empirical self being put in its place by our rational self.
But how does this painful humiliation lead to any positive motivation? This feels like a paradox. How do we get from feeling crushed to feeling motivated?
Here's where it gets really interesting. This is another aha moment. This humiliation, this negative effect on our pride, combined with the positive character of the moral law itself, as the expression of our freedom, our rational capacity, produces a unique feeling.
Respect.
Respect. Okay, but if it's a feeling, how is it different from those other pathological feelings Kant rejected? Isn't it just another flavor of pleasure or pain?
This is precisely what makes respect unique and central for Kant. He emphasizes it is not pathological. Respect is a feeling that is produced by an intellectual ground, not by sensory input or empirical association. It's the only feeling whose necessity we can understand a priori through reason alone.
Okay, so it comes from reason, not the senses. Right. It's not an antecedent desire that drives us to morality. Instead, respect is morality itself subjectively considered as an incentive. It starts as a negative effect that weakens the pull of our inclinations and strikes down self-conceit. But this removal of obstacles is then experienced as a positive advancement of reason's power. When the barriers fall, the moral law's inherent authority shines through and inspires this feeling.
So it's not a feeling that causes morality, but a unique, almost intellectual feeling that arises from recognizing the moral law and our commitment to it. It sounds like a uniquely human experience, given we have both reason and these interfering inclinations.
It is indeed. This experience of respect implies our finitude. We're finite rational beings, susceptible to inclinations that conflict with duty. A supreme being, perfectly rational, free from temptation. It wouldn't experience respect because there'd be no internal obstacle for its reason to overcome.
You'd just be good, effortlessly.
Exactly, it would be holy.
Yeah.
For us, respect is the feeling of that internal struggle and the potential triumph of reason.
This also makes me think about the difference between respecting someone and just admiring them. We often blur those lines, but Kant seems very clear.
Absolutely clear, and it's a vital distinction. He quotes Fontenelle, "I bow before an eminent man, but my spirit does not bow." You can admire someone's talents, their strength, intelligence, power, their accomplishments, but that isn't respect in the deep moral sense.
So what is respect then?
True respect is paid to moral merit, to the law that a virtuous example holds before us, even if we feel it reluctantly, maybe because it challenges our own weaknesses. It's the internal recognition of a universal moral standard that person embodies, not just awe for their skills or status. If we find out someone we admired for talent has moral failings, admiration might vanish, but the respect for the moral law itself remains untouched.
That's a powerful distinction, and it brings us to the concepts of duty and holiness. If we're finite, always struggling, we can't be perfectly holy like that divine being. So what's our moral job description then?
Correct. For finite, rational beings like us, the moral law functions as a law of duty, of moral necessitation. We cannot achieve holiness, perfect, untempted accord with the law in this finite life. Our nature means we'll always feel the pull of inclination.
So what can we achieve?
What we are capable of is endless progress towards it. The concept of duty demands objective alignment with the law and subjective respect for the law in our maxim. This constant striving, this infinite journey towards an ideal we approach but never fully reach, that is our moral vocation. It's not about arriving at perfection, but about the lifelong commitment to the path.
An endless progress that gives a really special, almost sacred meaning to personality, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Kant states humanity in his person must be holy to him. Why? Because a human being is the subject of the moral law and so of that which is holy in itself. Our capacity for moral self-legislation, for autonomy, for being an end in itself, our very personality, has infinite worth. It evokes reverence and the highest respect.
So it's not about our talents or looks or status, but our fundamental rational nature, our ability to choose the good.
Precisely. That's what sets us apart and makes us worthy of profound respect from others and, critically, from ourselves. It's a call to treat ourselves and others as beings whose moral choices matter infinitely, not just as tools or obstacles.
Okay, so we've got the moral law, our freedom, the crucial role of respect and duty. But if we're constantly striving for holiness, making this endless progress towards an ideal we can't fully reach in this life, what's the ultimate goal? What's the end towards which practical reason directs us? What's the complete picture?
This brings us to what Kant calls the dialectic of practical reason. Similar to how speculative reason ran into contradictions, antinomies, when it tried to grasp the absolute totality of knowledge.
Right, the world having a beginning versus no beginning.
Exactly. Practical reason also encounters a kind of dialectic, a tension when it tries to determine the highest good. It's like reason inherently seeks completeness, but runs into apparent paradoxes in that quest.
And what exactly does Kant mean by the highest good? It sounds, well, good, like something everyone wants.
The term highest itself has a key ambiguity for Kant. It can mean either supreme, the foundational good, not conditioned by anything else, or complete, consummatum, the whole package, the ultimate all-encompassing good.
Okay, supreme versus complete, what fits where?
For Kant, virtue worthiness to be happy, consistently acting from duty, is the supreme good. It's the unconditioned foundation. No amount of happiness can make up for a lack of virtue.
Virtue comes first, unconditionally. Makes sense.
Then, happiness, the state where everything goes according to his wish and will, is the second component. It makes the good complete, but only when it's proportioned to virtue. The highest good in the world is this combination, virtue and happiness in exact proportion.
So the ideal state is where good people are happy, and their happiness matches their goodness.
Exactly. The morally good person deserves to be happy, and ideally their happiness should match their virtue.
Okay, that sounds reasonable. Why does this cause a dialectic, a contradiction? Why isn't that just how things work out?
This leads to the profound antinomy of practical reason. The core problem is, how do virtue and happiness relate as cause and effect in this highest good? It can't be an analytic connection, meaning virtue is happiness, or happiness is virtue. Their motives are totally different. Quite heterogeneous, as Kant says. One aims at duty, the other at pleasure.
Okay, so they aren't the same thing. It must be a causal link then. One causes the other.
It must be synthetic, a causal connection. Either virtue causes happiness, or happiness causes virtue. And here's where the contradiction hits, because our experience seems to deny both possibilities.
How so?
Well, first, the pursuit of happiness cannot produce a virtuous disposition. That would be heteronomy, basing morality on feelings or outcomes, which Kant already shot down. If you only act morally because you think it'll make you happy, you're not truly acting morally.
Right, motivation matters. So happiness can't cause virtue. What about the other way? Does virtue cause happiness?
Empirically, in the world we see, not necessarily, a virtuous disposition does not reliably produce happiness in the sensible world. Often, virtue leads to hardship, suffering, being taken advantage of, while vice seems to prosper.
Yeah, we see that all the time. Good people struggling, corrupt people thriving.
Exactly. This antinomy, this apparent clash between the moral demand for the highest good, virtue plus proportional happiness, and the reality we observe, threatens to make the highest good practically impossible. If virtue doesn't lead to happiness, and happiness doesn't lead to virtue, how can we rationally pursue a state that requires their unity? Reason seems to demand something the world doesn't deliver.
That's a massive problem. If following the moral law doesn't guarantee happiness, and reason commands us to promote this highest good that includes both, how does Kant resolve this? It seems like morality might be irrational if its ultimate goal is impossible.
This is where Kant's genius, his whole system, comes to the rescue. He resolves this antinomy through his transcendental idealism. Remember the two standpoints from the first critique.
Phenomenal and noumenal. The world as we experience it, and the world as it is in itself.
Exactly. He argues we exist simultaneously as phenomena, observable beings in the sensible world, subject to natural laws, and noumena, things in themselves, capable of free causality in an intelligible world. In the phenomenal world, the world of cause and effect we observe, virtue and happiness aren't directly necessarily linked.
So the good don't always get rewarded here on Earth according to natural laws.
Correct. But, Kant argues, in the noumenal intelligible realm, our virtue, as a noumenal act of a free will, can be seen as the ground for a possible connection to happiness as a phenomenal effect. This connection isn't direct within nature, but can happen immediately through an intelligible author of nature.
An intelligible author of nature. That sounds like God.
It points that way. Resolving the antinomy requires us to think beyond the purely sensible world, to postulate a higher order where this proportionality between virtue and happiness can be guaranteed.
So, to make the highest good logically possible and fulfill our moral duty to strive for it, we have to postulate things beyond our direct experience. This must be the famous postulates of pure practical reason.
Exactly that. These postulates are not theoretical proofs. Speculative reason can't demonstrate them empirically. However, they are necessarily assumed by pure practical reason because they are inseparable from the moral law and our duty to seek the highest good. They extend speculative cognition only for practical purposes. They provide a pure rational belief.
Vernunftglaub.
A rational belief, not knowledge. Okay, let's break down the first one, the immortality of the soul. Why is that necessary?
Okay, the moral law commands us to strive for complete conformity with it, for holiness. But as finite beings, always wrestling with inclinations, perfect holiness is unattainable in this finite life, yet the command is unconditional, implying the goal is achievable somehow.
So how do we achieve it if not in this life? For finite beings, Kant argues, this complete conformity can only happen through an endless progress towards moral perfection, an infinite striving. This endless progress requires the existence and personality of the same rational being continuing endlessly. Therefore, the immortality of the soul is a necessary postulate. It allows for the possibility of fulfilling our moral vocation over an infinite duration.
So immortality isn't proven, but we must believe it for our moral striving towards perfection to make rational sense. Okay. And the second postulate, the existence of God. How does that follow?
Well, the moral law also commands us to promote the highest good, which includes happiness proportion to morality. But as we saw, the natural world by itself doesn't guarantee this proportion. Virtue doesn't automatically yield happiness here.
Right, the antinomy.
So, to make sense of the command to promote the highest good, which includes deserved happiness, we must postulate a supreme cause of nature having a causality in keeping with the moral disposition.
A cause that can ensure happiness matches virtue.
Exactly. An intelligent, morally perfect, holy and beneficent, an all-powerful being, which is the concept of God. Again, this isn't a theoretical proof of God's existence. It's a practical necessity for reason to conceive of the highest good as achievable, as something we can meaningfully strive towards. It's a belief grounded in moral duty.
This really brings home the primacy of practical reason you mentioned earlier. It seems practical reason doesn't just tell us what to do, it actually shapes our necessary beliefs about reality.
You've got it. When theoretical reason hits its limits on questions like God and immortality, but practical reason needs them for its necessary ends, like making the highest good possible, then practical reason has primacy, because ultimately Kant says all interest is ultimately practical. Our deepest human interest lies in morality, duty, striving for the good.
So theoretical reason kind of serves practical reason in the end.
In a way, yes. Speculative reason's interest in knowing the whole picture finds its fulfillment when it supports practical reason, providing the framework where our moral duties make coherent sense. This primacy provides us with the means for going beyond the sensible world and provide cognitions of a supersensible order, crucial for our moral lives, even if they're not scientific facts but practical necessities. It gives moral meaning to things science can't touch.
Okay, so we have these profound insights. The moral law within, our freedom, the crucial feeling of respect, and even these necessary postulates about immortality and God that arise from our duty. But how do we actually live by this? How do we take these objective moral laws, these big philosophical ideas, and make them subjectively practical in our messy everyday lives? This is where the rubber meets the road, isn't it?
Absolutely. This is what Kant tackles in the doctrine of method, for pure practical reason. It's not enough for the law to be objectively valid. It has to become a living, motivating force within us. This section is really about moral education, about how we cultivate genuine moral dispositions in ourselves and others. How does reason actually become practical?
And this includes something called the typic of pure practical judgment. That sounds technical. How do we apply a super sensible moral law, a rule from pure reason, to our very sensible, concrete actions? It feels like bridging two different worlds.
It is bridging those worlds, and the typic is a crucial practical tool, kind of a mental shortcut. The rule is basically this. Ask yourself whether, if the action you propose were to take place by a law of the nature of which you were yourself a part, you could indeed regard it as possible through your will.
Okay, could I will my action to be a universal law of nature?
Exactly. It uses the form of a law of nature as an analogy, a type, to test our maxims. Crucially, it's not about judging based on the likely consequences in the natural world, but whether the form of your maxim could function consistently as a universal law, like gravity or biology.
Can we use a modern example? Say, I see some juicy gossip online about someone I dislike. It might not even be true. My maxim might be, I'll spread this potentially false gossip because it harms someone I dislike. How does the typic apply?
Great example. Using the typic, you'd ask, could it be a universal law of nature that everyone spreads unverified negative information about people they dislike? If that were a law like gravity, what would social reality become?
Chaos. Constant attacks, no trust, impossible relationships.
Exactly. The very possibility of reliable social interaction, communication based on some level of trust, would break down. Could you, rationally assent to belonging to such a system, such a nature? The typic reveals the internal contradiction in willing such a maxim universally. It shows it's immoral, not because of the specific harm, but because the maxim itself is formally self-defeating if universalized. It helps us guard against common moral errors.
What kind of errors is Kant most worried about here?
He highlights two main dangers. The first, and he thinks the most dangerous, is the empiricism of practical reason.
Empiricism, basing things on experience.
Yes, specifically basing good and evil purely on experiential consequences, usually happiness, pleasure, or pain avoidance. This, Kant says, destroys at its roots the morality of dispositions. It replaces duty with empirical interest and just aligns our choices with our inclinations.
Because morality becomes just calculating what feels good or works out best for me.
Exactly. It makes morality conditional, subjective, arbitrary. It undermines its universal, unconditional force, reducing it to clever self-interest.
Okay, so empiricism drags morality down into calculation. What's the second error?
That's the mysticism of practical reason. This is about seeking supersensible intuitions or special feelings, treating symbols like the kingdom of God as literal blueprints, or relying on vague inner voices instead of clear reason.
So getting carried away with spiritual feelings or visions as moral guides?
Right. While Kant sees this as less dangerous than empiricism, which corrupts morality's core, mysticism still strays into the transcendent. It can lead to a kind of ungrounded moral fanaticism, substituting the clear, universal moral law with vague, subjective, uncheckable feelings or imagined insights.
So if empiricism is too grounded in feeling and mysticism is too ungrounded, what's the right path?
The rationalism of judgment. This is Kant's preferred path. It takes from sensible nature only one thing: conformity with law, the pure form of lawfulness, the idea of universalizability. And it imports into the supersensible realm nothing that can't be really exhibited by actions in the sensible world, according to that formal rule. It relies on reason's own power for universal law-giving, avoiding the traps of consequence chasing or mystical shortcuts.
Okay, stick to the rational form of the law. But this is all about understanding the principles. How do we actually cultivate genuine moral dispositions? How do we make this real in ourselves and, say, in educating children?
The method involves a couple of key practical steps. First, we must make the appraisal of actions by moral laws a natural occupation and, as it were, a habit.
Make judging actions morally a habit.
Yes. Constantly, consciously asking, was this action done merely in conformity with the law, legality? Or was it done from duty, out of respect for the law, morality? Kant notes that even in casual chat, people are drawn to debating the motives behind actions, trying to sniff out pure intentions versus mixed ones. This ongoing exercise of moral judgment is key.
So it's about relentlessly examining not just what people do, but the purity of why they do it, a deep habitual self-reflection.
Exactly. Secondly, Kant stresses the power of pure examples, presenting moral principles through vivid stories, like his own example of the honest man pressured to lie, facing ruin but holding firm to truth, reveals the purity of the moral principle.
How will that work?
Such a story, he argues, lifts the listener beyond mere approval. It evokes admiration, then astonishment, then profound veneration. It makes you wish you could be that person, not for any reward, but for the inherent shining worth of the action itself. Kant believes morality must have more power over the human heart the more purely it is presented, especially when it involves overcoming suffering, because that strips away any suspicion of self-interest.
So it's not about making morality seem easy or fun, but showing its inherent dignity, its awesome power, often through the courage it demands. And what's the ultimate goal of all this moral cultivation, this rigorous method?
The ultimate aim is to cultivate respect for ourselves in the consciousness of our freedom.
Respect for ourselves.
Yes, a person who dreads nothing more than to find on self-examination that he is worthless and contemptible in his own eyes. That person is fertile ground for all good moral dispositions. This deep respect, this appreciation for our own capacity for moral self-legislation becomes the most powerful internal incentive. It's not a fuzzy feel-good feeling, but a profound rational satisfaction in aligning our will with the moral law. That's the bedrock of genuine virtue, an internal compass immune to external pressures or fleeting desires. Hashtag tag tag outro.
Wow, what an incredible journey into the depths of reason and morality. We've really gone deep into Kant's critique of practical reason today, uncovering insights that just fundamentally redefine how we think about right and wrong, and maybe even about ourselves.
The powerful stuff.
Yeah. We've seen that true morality, for Kant, isn't about chasing happiness or seeking rewards, but about the pure self-legislating will, the autonomy of reason.
It's about understanding and embracing our freedom, living by principles that could hold universally, no matter the cost or the desire.
It's about that quiet, insistent whisper of ought that reveals our deepest rational capacity.
And we've learned how this core moral experience, this fact of reason, is so fundamental that it actually leads us to postulate things beyond the empirical world, our soul's immortality, God's existence.
Yeah.
Not as proven facts, but as practical necessities for our moral striving to make ultimate sense.
Right. They provide a moral framework for a reality that science alone can't fully grasp. This deep dive really underlines Kant's point that the path to wisdom must, for us human beings, unavoidably pass through science. And by science, he means rigorous critical thinking and self-examination, not just going with feelings or tradition.
It's a call to elevate our understanding of ourselves, our choices, and our place in a moral universe that transcends mere personal preference. It challenges us to look within, understand the source of duty, and recognize the immense inherent dignity that comes with our rational nature.
And to try and live up to that potential.
Exactly. Not just for ourselves, but for the sake of the moral law itself.
So here's a final thought for you, our listeners. In a world that constantly bombards us with temptations for immediate gratification, social validation, or just fear of consequences, how might actively cultivating that Kantian respect for ourselves in the consciousness of our freedom, that profound recognition of our own power for moral self-legislation, how might that fundamentally reshape not just our personal choices, but maybe even the fabric of our collective future?
How could that internal compass help us navigate today's complex moral landscape with more clarity, more conviction?
Something to reflect on. What stands out to you from this deep dive? We invite you to carry that question with you. That's all for this deep dive into Kant's critique of practical reason. Thank you for joining us on this rigorous exploration.
Thanks for diving in.
Until next time, keep thinking deeply.